Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Now, sometimes there are just more questions than answers. And more often than not, that's the best way to learn. For if we give an answer, or if we give an answer too early, then we might miss the more complete answer that is yet to come. Now, we've barely begun our journey through the Masnavi, and already here at the beginning of the Masnavi, in the first full story, that is the story of the Padeshah falling in love with the kanizak, the king or monarch falling in love with the young slave girl, I already have more questions than answers. Now, amid what I call the low-hanging fruit of the obvious sugar-coated sayings of Hazrati Maulana about love, there is actually one of my personal favorite quotes from the first volume. It begins at Bait 109. Let me share it if I may. Ashaqi pedast az zarari del, nist bimari chu bimari del. So in English it goes, love sickness is manifest because of the soreness of heart. And there is no sickness like the sickness of the heart. And it continues, the illness of the lover is separate from all other illnesses. And here's my quote. Eshk ostrolabe asrare chodast. Love is the astrolabe of the secrets of God. This is my favorite quote. He goes on and says, if love sickness is from this side or from that side, in the end, it is our guide to that side. Whatever I say in the description and explanation of love, when I come to love, I am embarrassed because of that. And although the spoken tafsir, that is the spoken commentary or explanation, is enlightening, he says, lik eshke bizaban roshan tarast. However, love without speech is more radiant. We love love, and the Masnavi is full of love quotes that are all over the internet. How many of us grew up living with the 1967 Beatles song, All You Need Is Love? Type in love songs in a Google search, and you're going to get about 1,890,000,000 results. Whew. How many of us came to know Hazrati Maulana, Rumi as he is called in the West, from one of these famous love quotes of his? But there is a verse amidst all of the other verses that caught my eye, and it gave me much pause to think, and it goes this way. Gar Khoda khahad na goftand az nazar, pas Khoda ben mudeshan ajze bashar. Because of pride, they did not say, if God wants. So he's talking about the physicians in the story. Because of pride, they did not say, if God wants. So, God showed them the inability of humanity. Now, the doctors in the story believed that they were the Masih, they were the messiahs of the world, and had in their hands the salve for every pain. Har yeki az ma Masih olamist. Each one of us is a Masih of the world. We are a Messiah of the world, and in our hand is the salve for every pain. But, as we know from the story, they did not. They were no match for the will of God. We learned that the slave girl became sick because of the decree, the qaza of God. It says, An kanizak as qaza bimar shod. That young slave girl, because of the decree, became sick. So, here are my questions. Is there a decree from God that governs my entire life? Is it all planned out for me? And if so, then what is my destiny? How do I know? And what is this inability that Hazreti Maulana wants me to understand from this story? And finally, at least finally at this moment, do I have any free will or agency at all? So there are several concepts which we will encounter in the next few minutes together. One is qaza, in Persian qaza, or qada in Arabic, meaning the decree, or sometimes translated as justice, but I'm translating it as the decree, what was written. And there is qadar, fate or destiny. There is ikhtiyar, it's in Persian, or ikhtiyar in Arabic, which is choice or free will. And finally, in Arabic, there is tawakkul, or in Persian, tawakkul, reliance, or trusting God's plan. Let's look at some texts first. In Surah Imran 76:30, we read, وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. And you do not will except that Allah wills. Indeed, Allah is the all-knower and the all-wise. There is also a hadith that I understand to be referenced by Al-Ghazali that goes, O Dawood, you wish and I wish, and nothing occurs except what I wish. So, if you resign yourself to that which I wish, I will grant you that which you wish. And if you do not resign yourself to that which I wish, I will cause you to wear yourself out regarding what you wish. Then nothing will happen except what I wish. So, do we have free will or not? And what is the relationship between qaza, the decree, qadar, destiny or fate, and ikhtiyar, free will or choice? Well, there's another hadith that comes from Tirmidhi. The Prophet said, young man, I will teach you some words. Be mindful of Allah and He will take care of you. Be mindful of Allah and you shall find Him at your side. And if you ask of Allah. And if you need help, seek it from Allah. Know that if the whole world were to gather together in order to help you, they would not be able to help you except if Allah had written so. And if the whole world were to gather together in order to harm you, they would not harm you except if Allah had written so. The pens have been lifted and the pages have dried. So, if the qaza, the decree, has been written, then is the story of our lives all scripted out and we are just characters in a great cosmic drama playing our part, reciting our lines and trying to hit our mark on the stage of this life? Now, often when I'm wrestling with a situation, I try to make things as practical as I can, and I put the questions that I have to test in real life. So here we go. I happen to be a fan of American college football, and I always find myself watching my team, the University of Michigan, and I have to say, go blue. It's from where I received my first master's degree. They recently beat their arch rival Ohio State for the second year in a row. Now my question is, were they destined to win? Was it decreed and preordained that they would win? Or did they, through hard work and dedication, make a series of best choices that resulted in a win? Now, The playoffs and a national championship are still to come. So again, I ask, are they destined to win that too? And if so, do they even need to practice? And what about the other team's destiny? What's the decree for them? And what will their destiny be? Now, just for the record, I think my team should actually choose to practice really hard. But you can see that it's very easy to go down the rabbit hole of philosophy and psychology and intellectualism and the real world of what ifs and overthink this conversation. But this struggle is not new, for if there is no free will, then how can we be held morally responsible for our actions? This was the struggle in Islam historically. There were the Qadariya, who rejected predestination and asserted that human beings possessed absolute free will. And there were the Jabriya, who believed that humans were under the control of predestination, having no choice or free will. And there were also the Ash'ariya, who took more or less a middle position between the Qadariya and the Jabriya. And there is another hadith. It's sahih. That means authentic. And it was also reported by Al-Tirmidhi. And it goes this way. I heard the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, say, the first thing that Allah created was the pen. And he commanded it to write. And it said, my Lord, what shall I write? And he said, write down what has been ordained for all things until the establishment of the hour. That is, until the last day comes or till the Qiyamah comes. Okay, so we know that we live in a cause and effect world. There are the so-called laws of nature, which today are more or less understood as scientific principles, like Newton's law of gravitation, his 3 laws of motion, the ideal gas laws, Mendel's laws, the laws of supply and demand, the laws of cause and effect, Einstein's laws of gravity, and so on and so on. And there are other so-called regularities, like the regularity of the ocean tides, the perihelion of Mercury's orbit, the photoelectric effect, and that the universe is expanding, and also so on and so on. And we see these in play every day. If I drop a rock, it will fall to the ground and not fly up into the air. Well, at least so far. This is Newton's law of gravitation. I also know if I kick a ball with the appropriate amount of force, it will move in the direction as directed by that force. This is Newton's first law of motion. Any object in motion will stay in motion, and any object at rest will remain at rest unless acted on by an unbalanced force. So there are clearly some things that are determined or even predetermined in this world of cause and effect. Now, I often use the example of domino toppling to explain both how cause and effect works in this world and about the nature of predeterminism. You know what I'm talking about. Dominoes are stood up on end in a sequence called a domino run, with the first domino being used as a trigger to create a chain reaction known as the domino effect. Now, some, as you might know, are simple and others are more complex. My design with the many possible in-between events that are ultimately coming to an end with some kind of concluding event is the qada. It's the qaza. It is what was written. It is what has been decided to happen. Now, once I topple the first domino, what now happens is the qadar, the destiny. It is how the qada plays out. One event leads to another because of a primary action with a series of effects or results and the secondary causes now coming into play. So having said all of that, let me give you a new word, determinism. Determinism is the idea that everything that happens in the world is determined completely by previously existing causes. Now, there is a fundamental paradox that arises under assumptions of determinism in human behavior. Although specific behaviors can be attributed to specific antecedent causes, meaning causes that come before, humans almost universally experience a sense of being free to perform or refrain from performing any given behavior at the point of action. Hard determinism resolves this paradox by insisting that the sense of free choice is illusory, whereas that which is known as soft determinism argues that such a sense is not in fact incompatible with causal explanations. Now, that's a lot of words, but if you think about it, it makes sense. Hazreti Maulana teaches us, he says, see both the act of God and our act. Know that our act exists. This is visible, or this is clear. If the action of the people does not exist, then don't say to someone, why did you do such as that? The creating of God is the author of our actions, and our actions are the indications of the creating of God. So, even if we look behind an effect to its cause, there is always a cause before the cause. And if you believe as I do, the logical conclusion is, ultimately, there is a primary cause. There is a first cause, and that would be God. However, it also seems that Hazreti Maulana wants to teach us that this chain of events can be interrupted. Just like our domino toppling, at any moment, I can reach in and interrupt the chain of topplings that is in process. It's easy for us to say, well, of course, that would represent God. God can do that any time. It's God. God can do that. But Hazreti Maulana writes, the saints, the awliya, have power from God. They remove the shot arrow from its path. And when the saint becomes regretful, he closes the doors of that which is generated from the cause of the hand of the Lord. And because of the opening of the gate, he makes unsaid what has been said, so that from that he burns neither the skewer nor the kebab. He erased that saying and made it disappear from all of the hearts that heard that word. So, if I'm understanding this correctly, Hazreti Maulana is teaching that the saints, the awliya, have been given the power to interrupt, to halt the qadar that is now in progress. Wow, that's huge. And of course, there is the next logical question. If they can stop it or change or alter the qadar, what about us? Is it possible that we, given the right circumstances, could also change or alter our destiny? Well, for this conversation, let's accept that there is a path set out for us to follow, and we call it the Siratul Mustaqim, right? The straight path. But we humans continue to stray off the path. Is that also our destiny? Has that been predetermined too? Now look what it says in Surah 14:4 of the Quran. It says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِنْ رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ فَيُضِلُّ اللَّهُ مَا يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَا يَشَاءُ وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. We did not send any messenger except in the language of his people, so that he might clearly convey the message to him. So Allah lets go astray whom he wills, and lets find guidance whom he wills. And he is the mighty, Al-Aziz, and the wise, Ul-Hakim. This passage reminds me of the story of Job in the Bible, who's called Ayub in the Quran, when God allows Job to suffer, however, not as a punishment, but both as a test and a strengthening of his faith. So often, when the dominoes fall, life can either seem to be or can become out of control. For years, I worked in the field of recovery, and we taught that addiction is an attempt to control that which seems out of control. But addiction is, of course, the illusion of control, because life continues to spin out of control more and more as one turns to their drug of choice, as the addict continues to live in denial about both the source and the solution of their problems. So maybe life is not a straight line with only one direction to go. Maybe life is a series, actually more like a matrix of binary choices, with the decree being written for each and every if-then choice that we make. Meaning, if I choose A, then it is written that this will happen. And if I choose B, then it has also been decreed, it has also been written that this will happen. Now, I have the ability then to exercise my free will, ikhtiyar, in a way that is compatible with God's qada for me, and how my qadar, my fate, my destiny plays out for me based on a combination of my choices and God's decree. So now, the result can be either positive or negative depending on which binary choice I make. It is interesting, speaking of addiction again, that the addict usually knows what the best choice is for them, but they give their power over to the drug of choice, knowing full well what the consequences are going to be. The consequences will be of their actions, and it is done over and over and over again. Many years ago, I had a great teacher who has now passed away, who used to teach that life is like swimming in a stream or swimming in a river. And sometimes it's a stream, and sometimes a river, and sometimes a torrent. However, the problem that we make for ourselves is that we try to swim upstream and against the current, or we try to even get out of the stream and get onto the dry land where we think it is safer. His teaching was simple, that we should choose to allow ourselves to go with the current of the stream and go where it takes us, and not fight against the current of the river. Rather, we need to work with the river, to negotiate the rocks and the rapids and the sandbars, and sometimes the unexpected waterfall. I remember the first time he taught me this. He turned and looked upward to the sky, into the heavens, and began to imitate doing the backstroke, instructing me to look up into the heavens and remember that there is so much we don't see when our head is face down in the water, swimming away, so to speak. I've had lots of phone calls lately from people, some still struggling with addiction and some struggling with recovery. So if you don't mind, let me speak to them while we're continuing our conversation as well. Don't forget what step 3 is in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Ikhtiyar, a choice. We made a decision. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. We then need to be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Sounds kind of like the physicians in our story of the Padeshah and the kanizak, doesn't it? So in the so-called Big Book, we read, so, our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, it says, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them, even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. This is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. And my response is, La ilaha illallah. Isn't it interesting that the solution of the problem does not reside in the hands of the addict? The book continues. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something, we will not let go. We ask God, ready for this, to help us be willing. And when ready, we say something like this. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. This, I'm saying, is the role of ikhtiyar, of choice, of free will, to turn and to ask God for help. It's interesting, I find, that in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the word surrender does not occur at all. To understand surrender in this conversation is so important because surrender is a choice. It's an exercise of free will. Whether you say, I give up, or I say, uncle, it doesn't matter. At some point, we choose to give up, to surrender, and this is the first part of tawakkul. Surrender with an exclamation mark. Surrender and place our complete faith in God's grand master plan for our lives, to trust in God as our source of support and strength, and to rely on His unlimited power as we continue striving to reach our aims and overcome difficulties. We choose to align with God's will, to turn our lives over, or we choose to fight against the current and to go upstream against God's will and insist that this life is ours and only ours and that we will live it the way we choose. It's a binary choice. It's free will, A or B, align or not to align, fight or surrender, go with the stream of life or not. Again, this is tawakkul, one's act of complete reliance on Allah or trusting in His plan or having perfect trust in God. Hazrat Maulana teaches us, he says, O heart, bring an example for the sake of distinction, so that you might know jabr, compulsion, apart from ikhtiyar, apart from choice. I'm either compelled or I have free will. First of all, he says, there is the hand which is shaking from trembling. And second of all, there is the hand you cause to shake. Know that both of its movements are created by God, but one is not able to compare this with that. I trust this, and it's hard for my mind to grasp it completely and understand it, but I trust this. This is a conversation that we will continue to have over the months to come. And in the meantime, maybe we should do the backstroke downstream, looking up to heavens. We turn our will and our lives over to the care of God, with God's help, inshallah. But before we end, with your permission, let me return to my football team for a moment, for one more closing thought. Blake Corum was the running back for the University of Michigan in the 2022 football season. He was certain to be in consideration for the Heisman Trophy, the award given annually to the most outstanding college football player in America. But in the second to the last regular season game, late in the first half against the University of Illinois, he injured his knee and had to leave the game, with the most crucial games of the season still on the schedule ahead. And he had to have surgery, which sadly ended his season of play. Now, in spite of this, to his credit and amazing effort, he was still named to the first team All Big Ten and the conference's running back of the year. Wow. Even though the record-setting season he was on pace for, and the possibility of his being a finalist for the Heisman Trophy, and to maybe become a part of the team that was winning the national championship this year, was all cut short. Now, this is the point of the story. In spite of his being injured and out for the remainder of the season, he wrote in one tweet, "I believe God does everything for a reason, and this is just an obstacle I have to overcome along my journey." And then after the season, he again tweeted, "God's plan has always been better than my plan." This is tawakkul. Perhaps the questions that we have about qada and qadar and ikhtiyar are not so important once we surrender and put our trust, our will, our lives into the care of God. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, 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 Allah, Allah, Allah.